This is Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Ghannam.
And this is Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have a lot to cover today. We have some big topics to cover, plus we're going to have an in-studio guest. I think one of the things that I'd like to talk about, which is kind of a major event in terms of covering the Arab world in the Middle East, is the very tragic passing of Mohamed Morsi, the first democratically elected president of Egypt in the modern era. As I'm sure many of our listeners know, last week, or earlier this week rather, Mohamed Morsi was brought to an Egyptian courthouse. He was being retried on espionage charges. He asked his attorney if he could speak for a few minutes. He spoke for approximately 5 minutes, collapsed immediately, was rushed to a hospital, and pronounced dead on arrival. Mohamed Morsi, the first democratically elected president of the Egyptian Republic in the modern era, dead after spending 5 years in prison, Jamal. It's a tragedy for Egypt, it's a tragedy for the Arab world, and it's a tragedy for democracy.
That's right, Jess. I want to talk about it because this is really important, even though, this is the thing, this story received very little coverage internationally and hardly any coverage in the Egyptian media. And I'll come back to the Egyptian media because this is very important. In fact, if on the day Mohamed Morsi passed away and the day after, if you opened the main newspapers in Egypt, if you looked at Al-Ahram and others, the headline news was about protocol meetings that President Sisi was having and other things. And then in the lower part corner, just a short story, paragraph or two telling you about the death of a former Egyptian president.
It's unbelievable.
And like you said, Jess, he was the first and only probably, he was the only democratically elected president
of Egypt. Yeah.
So I want to take us back to the days of, and this is, we'll look at this, and then this is will be all connected. Now, you can love Mohamed Morsi or you can hate him. That's not the issue.
No.
You can agree with him, you can disagree with him, but you cannot dispute the fact that he was elected democratically.
Yes.
And I am an eyewitness to this.
That's right, you were there.
Because I was in Egypt on the first day, the election in Egypt, the presidential elections in Egypt, and I have to tell the story. So I have to tell the whole process, right? So on the first day of the elections, I was in Cairo in Egypt and was running from precinct to another precinct to see the turnout, and they had a huge turnout. The second day, early in the morning, I, along with my team, we flew to Aswan, to Upper Egypt, which is really the south of Egypt, but referred to as Upper Egypt, to see kind of a difference, to see how the elections were handled there outside the capital, which is Cairo. And in both places, it was, I would say, very few incidents happened. The international monitoring community, including President Carter's group,
right,
were monitoring the elections to make sure.
And they certified it.
To certify that this was done democratically. And the people voted. And this was the first time when you saw an election result that was, I think, 53% to approximately to Mohamed Morsi, 47
instead of 99%
to Shafiq, and not the 90% and 99%. At the time, because we covered the elections for 2 days, and it took few days to certify it, the atmosphere was very tense.
It was.
Because they were reporting that the elections were very close. These are the early news. So the Egyptian media and other monitors are saying that they've had a high turnout. The elections were very close. They needed to be certified. There were rumors circulating that the military junta was going to certify the elections in favor of Shafiq. There was, this is a reality. People were very nervous because people who voted, if you ask people, well, who did you vote for? They wanted to get out of this whole military establishment thing. I mean, after all, that's why they got rid of Mubarak and
That's right.
etc. So they were like looking forward to have the first civilian president. And everyone was thinking, well, he must have won because just unofficial results were showing us that more people, the turnout was huge. Morsi was receiving all the support. And now the rumors, we've had very tense rumors saying that Shafiq was going to be certified. And at the last minute, the military decided no.
Right.
They've kind of measured the tense
Pulse.
air and the pulse, and
pulse.
they pretty much thought, especially coming after a revolution now, that you're gonna play with these results. People are gonna come back to the streets, and we are in trouble. Plus, they had the eye of the international community basically on them. So finally, they said no, he won, and people were euphoric. Some people don't like, of course, Mohamed Morsi comes with his baggage because there are a whole also group of people who don't want to see the, Muslim Brotherhood take over the government. Nevertheless, he won and he became president. Now I want to fast forward, and I don't want to talk about the time because I was going in and out of Egypt, and I would say Morsi and his followers and the people he brought in made a lot of mistakes.
They did make a lot of mistakes.
So they've made a lot of mistakes. I mean, after all, he's a novice, he's a civilian, he's a professor, he's an educated man. By the way, he has a PhD, which many people don't talk about that. And he's not a politician. We've seen this happen. So what? Trump is a politician, right? I mean, you don't always elect people who come from the political elite or stream. And immediately, and this is the difference between today and as far as the media, I'm talking about the media. The media came immediately attacking him. They didn't give him a chance. They were making all kinds of jokes, like Morsi, he's going to have not one first lady, he's going to have 4 first ladies, all kinds of cartoons, all the spotlights on him. And he might have not done a great job as far as reviving the economy. People were expecting too much. Within that 1 year, basically, they destroyed his reputation.
That's right.
Like, again, I said, he's not the perfect person.
No, but remember, Jamal, that was the Mubarak media infrastructure, too. That was part, he really never got a fair shake.
No, he never got a fair shake. And they waited meaning the military waited for the right moment. They again measured the pulse of the street, and they saw people started to turn against him. They're unhappy, and they've seized the opportunity, of course, to arrest him and charge him with gaffe and corruption and spying for Hamas, all kinds of things. Now, like I said, I don't want to get into this because he's not a perfect person. And a lot of people didn't support him, but he never had a chance to survive beyond those 12 months. And so now there was a coup d'etat that no one wanted to admit that happened. There was a coup d'etat. How did they get rid of Morsi, a democratically elected president? The military came into the equation. They mobilized a lot of critics, especially what I call the Egyptian paid media. And I'll tell you why about now coming back to the Egyptian paid media, who didn't have the decency to even report on his death as a former president. Right. I think a drug lord would get more prominence, if he died in a jail than Mohamed Morsi.
But
they
Jamal,
totally neglected his death.
You should, regarding the coup, you should remind our listeners that at the time, the head of the military was General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, so the current president of Egypt. So it was al-Sisi, who is a protege of Mubarak, who led the coup d'etat that fell the first and only democratically elected president of Egypt in the modern era. So all of these things are connected because you're right, the paid media never gave him a fair shake. But the paid media is part of their military establishment.
Listen, Jess, and I'll tell you something funny. Now, when the revolution happened, and this is when millions of people were demonstrating against Mubarak, the Egyptian media, and I'm talking about not only Al-Ahram, which is the main newspaper, but the Egyptian Nile TV and the Egyptian television, Channel 1, they were reporting on different things. They had hundreds of thousands of people gathered right at Tahrir Square, and they were ignoring that they had this thing. And then as soon as the revolution happened and Mubarak was pretty much deposed, the second day, if you look at the headlines up to the last day of Mubarak, they were praising Mubarak to the high heavens.
Absolutely.
The second day after he was deposed, they went and they said, pretty much like, long live the revolution. They did the whole 180.
Right.
And they basically switched to their support to the revolution. And it didn't take them much to go back to start praising the military and how the military saved Egypt, etc., etc. So now, of course, if you open the newspaper every single day, it's, might as well they're covering Al-Sisi as if he's a god or he's a pharaoh, basically, the Egyptian pharaoh, and everything is all about him. And then the death of a former president,
right,
and the way he died, which we'll get to talk about the way he died, was totally ignored. So Mohamed Morsi, not only was he left to rot and die in prison, but also was totally scraped off from the whole history or modern history of Egypt. That whole year,
right,
there's a whole attempt to pretty much basically not bury him once, but bury him twice.
Well, Jamal, they unfortunately buried Mohamed Morsi multiple times. I want to do a couple of things really quick. I want to go back to the original context for how Morsi got elected in Egypt, and then I want to jump forward a little bit to talk about prisons in Egypt, which I know a little bit about, and the conditions of confinement, what it's like to be in a prison in Egypt. Number one, we talked about Mohamed Morsi being the first democratically elected president in the modern era in Egypt. But remember where it started, Jamal. It started in Tunisia with the Arab Spring. And so there was this effect of the Arab Spring that kind of,
the so-called Arab Spring.
Well, the so-called, we refer to it as the Arab Spring now. It's kind of now become the Arab Winter, unfortunately. But at that time, during the Arab Spring, there was this excitement and enthusiasm about the possibility that, yes, there was the possibility of democracy in the Arab world. And Tunisia went through its process. It spread throughout the region. The next place where it really took hold, Jamal, was in Egypt. And you were there, and we all remember in Tahrir Square the millions of people that were marching on the streets that eventually led to, what happened, Mubarak being basically arrested and released eventually, and the election of Mohamed Morsi. When Morsi was arrested, Jamal, this is really important point. He was not a well man physically anyways.
No, he has a long history of health issues,
yes,
including diabetes, liver and kidney diseases. This is well known, and he has been behind bars for 6 years, basically following the toppling, his toppling by a military coup led by El-Sisi in 2013, July 2013. By the way, I also was there in Egypt during the referendum on Sisi. And since everybody knew his health issues. And since he went to prison, he was denied medical care. His family was allowed to visit him in prison only 3 times.
In 6 years?
In 6 years, 3 times. He was held in solitary confinement for as much as 23 hours per day. 23 hours per day. under the United Nations, as you know, guidelines is classified as torture.
Yeah.
So even though when he appeared, you don't have evidence of, let's say, beating, on his face and whatever, but they were torturing him for 23 hours per day. And so he was in very, very poor health. That actually many human rights organizations, including the United Nations and others, and Human Rights Watch, brought his case many times to question that he should be granted medical care, and he was denied. So by the time they brought him,
It was too late.
you could say, yeah, he wasn't executed. Yes, he didn't die under torture, immediate torture, visible torture, but he died a slow death.
Well, I would say, Jamal, just to put it in a little more context, your description of Morsi's health even before he was arrested is very accurate. He was not a well man even before he was arrested. Egyptian prisons have been known internationally as being notorious for among the most cruel, inhumane, and most despicable prisons, not just in the Arab world, Jamal, but in the entire world. You're right. Human Rights Watch, which is one of the monitors of prison conditions all over the world, has listed Egypt as one of Egypt's prison system as one of the worst.
Well, Human Rights Watch issued a report in 2017 basically outlining what you're talking about and saying, talking about torture, inhumane conditions, etc. And guess what? The Egyptian government blocked human rights now from entering, and its members from entering into Egypt or holding a press conference when they were in Cairo to talk about their findings. In January 2019, President Sisi denied the existence of political prisoners in Egypt in an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes show. I don't know if you remember that. When he was sweating and looked like a deer with the headlights, after you stripped him from the very friendly paid Egyptian media, which usually interview him. When he was in front of 60 Minutes, it was embarrassing.
It was embarrassing.
It was embarrassing. And then when they asked him specifically about political prisoners, he said, "What political prisoners? We don't have any political prisoners."
Well, the reality, Jamal, is that Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, President el-Sisi, is a dissembler. He completely misrepresented. It would be kind to say that he lied, because it is well known among Egyptians as well as the international community that not only does Egypt arrest its political opponents and has hundreds, if not thousands, of political prisoners, that they practice on an ongoing basis torture. We have a term for it, Jamal. It's called no-touch torture. They do the touch torture, which is they inflict physical pain and suffering on people. They do that. But for a high-profile detainee prisoner like Mohamed Morsi, they do the no-touch torture, which is the torture of solitary confinement, denial of Medicare. So you don't see the welts, you don't see the scars, you don't see the bruising on the person. But what we know from research is that the solitary confinement, the denial of access to family, and the what we call psychological conditions of confinement take its toll on even a healthy person. So Mohamed Morsi was essentially given a death sentence immediately when he was arrested. It's really tragic on so many different levels. And as you said, and we've said this on Arab Talk forever, Jamal, Mohamed Morsi was a flawed candidate. But guess what? In a real democracy, you elect flawed candidates all the time. This country not accepted, of course. In a democracy, you elect someone who gets the most votes, except here, of course, with the Electoral College. But in a democracy, it's not against the law to elect an incompetent person. Now, Mohamed Morsi, unfortunately, when the history books are written, if they're written by the current regime, will not even be a footnote in the Sisi textbooks under the Sisi regime. And it's really a tragedy, because Egypt had a chance to really be a democracy and tragically it failed. And in the larger context of the Arab Spring, Jamal, we have to say really that we're in the midst of the Arab winter. Because with the downfall and collapse of the Arab Spring, minus maybe some things that happened in Tunisia, which still has some legs in terms of democracy, maybe some rumblings in Algeria, we are in what we would call the Arab winter, where strongmen and dictators and really brutal leaders are really, what is ruling the roost, so to speak, in the Arab world. Whether it's MBS, Mohammed bin Salman in Egypt, and his brutality with, the way he exercises control over political opponents, all the way to the Sudan, which we've been talking about, for weeks now, and how the interim government continues its brutal attacks on, the wish of the people of Sudan to actually have democracy. So the Arab Spring, Jamal, unfortunately, we're still in the cold, cold Arab winter.
All right, so we're going to actually switch subjects a little bit just because we have a lot of things to talk about.
Oh, yeah,
and
we
then
do.
We also have a guest who will be joining us on the show shortly from Palestine. But again, two things, of course, two important things we can't ignore. One, the warmongering and the saber rattling.
We keep talking
to
about
kind
it.
of getting us into a conflict with Iran, as you know, just within the past 24 hours. In our show last week, we discussed Iran. We were talking about this whole thing and the kind of call to do something about Iran. And then within the past 24 hours, well, guess what? Last week we were talking about attacks on Japanese ships,
Yes,
and
oil tankers,
and the pointing of the finger at the Iran as being responsible, and Iran denying this. And then, of course, this past 24 hours, a U.S. drone was downed by Iran, which Iran does not deny that it had downed this drone, but there is two different stories. The American story is that the drone was downed over international waters or in international airspace.
And the Iranians say it was Iranian airspace.
Exactly. So
hello.
So now and there were heavy warnings. Then it cooled down a little bit by Trump tweeting that basically Iran had committed a huge mistake, which kind of hints to a retaliation. So from last week to this week, we've seen a ratcheting of basically
The rhetoric from Pompeo,
and
Senator Tom Cotton, who is completely incompetent in terms of his analysis and understanding of the region. Tom Cotton, senator, basically came up and not testified, but gave an interview and said that basically we should start that they've crossed the line and we should take military action to teach Iran a lesson. Completely ignorant, completely warmongering, completely unsophisticated and ignorant analysis of what's happening in the world. So what wasn't covered, you're exactly right, Jamal, what wasn't covered is that the Iranians are claiming that the drone was in Iranian airspace. And if you go into the airspace of another country illegally or without announcing yourself, you run the risk of being called out on it. And so from the Iranian perspective, this drone penetrated Iranian airspace, and the Iranian military took steps to protect itself. That's one analysis.
Well, I mean, you have a pattern now of building a case to attack Iran, going back since early May. The attacks on the Saudi refinery by the Houthis.
Right.
An attack on now two Japanese ships, while the Prime Minister of Japan was visiting
Iran,
which is like, what a coincidence. And then followed by this week that Iran downs an American drone. So,
which is it? Where are you going?
Any minute now, I mean, something could happen. I mean, if they can basically pin that tail on...
Well, they already have, Jamal.
No, I don't think so, because I think these are all balloons, and they are testing the will, not of the Iranian people, they are testing the will of the international community. They are testing to see if the international community is buying these stories.
Well,
they did not buy the stories of people were wondering, well, why would Iran attack the Japanese ships when the Japanese prime minister is here? Why would Iran, the question now, well, why would they down a drone if the drone wasn't flying over its airspace?
Right.
So there are now questions circulating. That's why after the initial threat, kind of the rhetoric has cooled down a little bit. But I say, they're going to keep trying. Our initial predictions, Jess, is they're going to keep trying until something sticks.
Well, I think
that's where we're going to get into heavy water.
But unfortunately, we see the United Kingdom kind of being more on the side of the Trump point of view on Iran, unfortunately. And it looks like Boris Johnson will become the next prime minister there, who is the Trump clone for the UK, I mean, both physically and politically. The rest of the EU, a little bit more hesitant. Some of the more, out there members of the EU, the current government in Poland, for example, and some of the former Eastern European bloc countries seem to be supporting Trump. One thing, I'm sorry that we're kind of going fast here because I know we want to get to our guest, Jamal, but something is really bothering me.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to switch gears here for a minute. I want to talk about one of the presidential candidates' stance on Palestine.
Why not talk about them all? I mean, I know who you're going to be referring to. Because if you look at the New York Times article, if you're referring to when they were questioned about Israel's human rights violations. And every single Democratic candidate was kind of twisting and turning and changing. But I don't see anyone who gave a very powerful and honest response.
Right, but there's one in particular who I think needs to be called out, and that's Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Pete, when asked about if he were elected president, what would he do about the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem? And Mayor Pete is fashioning himself as a progressive, as someone who's very thoughtful, who really takes on these subjects and tries to be fair and balanced. Here's what Mayor Pete Buttigieg said about the moving of the American Embassy to Jerusalem. He said two things. One, he would leave it there. And his deep analysis, Jamal, was what is done is done. That what is done is done. So, Mayor Pete, I have a couple of questions for you. What do you say about reparations for African Americans who are descendants of slaves in this country? Are you going to say we shouldn't do reparations because what is done is done?
Or about victims of the Holocaust?
What about victims of the Holocaust? What is done is done. You wouldn't have the audacity to say that about survivors of the Holocaust or survivors of slavery. You would never say that an illegal, immoral, unethical act is what is done is done. Yet you pander to pro-Israel forces, pro-Israel lobby, you pander to AIPAC, and you have the audacity to hold yourself out as someone who has a deep analysis, and your analysis about this is what is done is done. Mayor Pete, you get a big F, you get a big fail, you're just like the rest. Too bad, Mayor Pete.
All right, so we're going to be switching gears here. We're going to talk a little bit about the conference. In the meantime, we're going to bring our guests here in the studio.
And you're listening to
Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. And we also welcome our viewers on Facebook Live. We appreciate you always joining us every every week from all over the world. And again, this is Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. And before we go and start talking to our guest from Palestine here, who will be with us shortly, I want to talk a little bit about the so-called Bahrain workshop, because today, just I was able to obtain one of the kind of the scheduled itinerary for the Bahrain workshop, which is supposed to happen.
Well, it's
on
not
June.
it's not a peace conference.
It's no longer a peace conference.
It's not the grand peace plan
So
that
just,
the Kushners.
just briefly, what they're basically selling, when they're talking about it now, it's an economic workshop. I have the whole arrivals and registration, from the cocktail reception to the opening speeches and panel, and a new production, a video called Imagining a Prosperous Middle East Region. This is the theme
Really?
for the conference.
I thought it was supposed to be about Palestine,
And
Jamal.
the first panel, the time is now building a coalition for Middle East prosperity. So the issue of Palestine doesn't exist in a way. This is a comprehensive economic conference for the Middle East, and I have the names of the moderators.
Who's the moderator?
Well, there are different panels. One moderator is Nick, a growing professor and author and broadcaster from the United Kingdom. And then they have the first panel, and then they have the second panel, fostering culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. That's another panel. The third one is empowering the people. That's day 2. It's kind of, what?
Can I ask you a question?
It's a mini World Economic Forum, and I wish
It's not even that.
I wish it was that, because that's more organized.
It's not even
and it has.
So let's cut
It's
to the
just a
chase.
joke,
How many Palestinians are there?
There is one.
Okay.
One.
Who doesn't even live in Palestine?
No, he does.
He does?
Yeah.
Jabari lives in Palestine?
Jabari lives
Part-time in Palestine.
lives in the Hebron side, where the settlers live there, and
Right.
where he gets protection by the Israeli occupation army. So that's kind of like their
Right.
man, kind of the representative. Everybody else is Palestinians, at least for now. They're boycotting this. This is the update. Anyway,
Is King Abdullah going?
no. Actually, Jordan is participating. Initially, they said they weren't going to participate, and that they're participating. I don't know if the king is going to go there, or if he's going to just send one of his representatives, because I've heard that a lot of these Arab countries who committed to going there, they are downgrading kind of their presence. Now we are going to welcome our guest in the studio right here, joining us.
Live from Palestine, I guess.
Well,
right?
it's not live from Palestine, live from San Francisco.
But via Palestine.
Aida Shibli, and you are from Tamera.org, and also you describe yourself as a global peace seeker.
Yeah.
So what is basically, when you talk about being a global peace seeker,
You're not going to the peace conference,
are you going to
Aida?
the peace conference in Bahrain?
No, unfortunately, no. Fortunately, no. So, salam alaikum, first of all. Thank you for continuing the. You are like in a wave from one topic to another.
That's how we do it. This is how we roll.
That's Arab talk, yeah.
Thank you. So I heard you just in the talk before, you were saying he is not even living in Palestine. So I want to admit from the beginning, I also don't live fully all the time in Palestine. I live part of the time in Tamera, Portugal, and part of the time in Palestine. But I think Palestine is not an issue of those who live there or do not live there.
Right.
It's a global issue that needs to be addressed.
That's
So,
right.
no,
Exactly.
I'm not contradicting what you just said about that person who is participating in this Bahraini initiative. I'm not.
Tell us a little bit about your organization.
I live in a community. It's not an organization. It's intentional community in Portugal. That is a project for 40 years, 26 years in Portugal.
Wow.
And that is in the base of this community, which is a peace research village that's seeking global solutions. the founders of it were participants of the student movement in 1968, going out and demonstrating against the system, and very soon finding out that what we've been demonstrating against, we have it in our inner structures. And so in order to arrive to a place where we reach global peace, we need to acknowledge that the war and the violence and the conflicts would not exist in the outside unless it was inside of us, including peace workers and peace activists. And so it is a community that gives a space for inner work and outer work, following the same statement that we can achieve peace in the outside as much as we can achieve it in the inside.
Ida, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm kind of curious about just from the outside first, before we get to the inside.
Yeah.
Tell us about Portugal and its relationship to Palestine, just in general.
Yeah.
Maybe our listeners don't know much about this.
I don't know if I would go more about Portugal, but I would go more about the community, because if this community would be in anywhere else in the world, I will be there.
Yeah.
So I'm not in Portugal because of Portugal, but because of this
community.
Global community. And this global community is initiating work in crisis areas in Palestine, in Kenya, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Mexico, where we go to places where there are people who are working already as grassroots and creating the alternative, and we go and support them and create spaces where we exchange knowledge with them. And so we do in Palestine, especially that I am Palestinian, so I'm leading this project in Palestine, where we go there to the West Bank and encourage our people to find an alternative way to resist the system. I mean, you both know for sure, and our people who are listening, the injustice that is happening in Palestine due to the occupation now for 70 years, and I'm from 48, so my village is next to Nazareth. Many times we speak about the occupation, and then it goes so fast that it became so normal, so
unfortunately,
a fact that we have to deal about it or speak about it, and then we compose sentences and we say occupation, but occupation is such a huge injustice, a huge cloud of pain and suffer.
And your village, what's the name of your village?
My village is like my family name, Shibli. We are Bedouins, and our living places are called according to the biggest family. So my tribe is the biggest tribe.
And is it still? I mean, what happened to the village now since 1948? Because I mean, even when you talk about Nazareth, and I've been to Nazareth many times, demographically it has changed. Of course, it still has a large Palestinian community, but half of Nazareth, kind of like there is what I call the Israeli Nazareth and the Arab Nazareth, and so demographically it has changed. And then many of the small villages around Nazareth, and that's why many of the people who live in Nazareth are not from Nazareth. They were evicted from these villages and then came to live in Nazareth because their villages basically were appropriated or destroyed.
So as I grew up as a Bedouin, and my grandfathers grew up as Bedouins, and they were nomads. They were not based on the land, but nevertheless, in 1936, the 2/3 of the tribe was slaughtered.
Oh no!
Actually, I got to know this information only when I was 17.
Wow!
Because my grandfathers, none of them wanted to speak about what happened before the Nakba. I'm speaking about 36. They did not want to speak about what happened, and the only thing that rescued us as a tribe, or the people who remained, only 250 people remained from all this tribe. They were running up the mountain and take refuge in the church that's in top of Mount Tabor Mountain, Jabal al-Tur. And for 3 months, they were Christians. And so in the end, they received a letter from the Pope saying that these are Christian followers and they should be protected. And this is how my tribe survived the slaughter.
So there is a misconception because we want to kind of clarify it to our listeners. Not all of our listeners are well versed in the situation in Palestine.
complexities of
Because when you say, you are a Bedouin,
Yeah.
right, versus, coming from the main cities. And then now you're talking about you're a Christian Bedouin.
Yeah, we were for 3 months Christian Bedouins. That's why I love Jesus.
Yeah.
But I'm born as a Muslim, and as
Yeah.
a person, I think that we all need to go beyond the existing religions.
So basically, what you're telling our listeners, because when this happened as a refuge, your tribe or the people who survived basically became Christians, and that's why the Pope interfered
Yeah.
or intervened
Yeah.
and saved you.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
You-
Otherwise, we will be slaughtered by
you would have been
at that time it was not the Israeli yet because it was 36.
right.
But we will be slaughtered by the Jewish armies that were operating within the British mandate. But just to say, it took me many years to take this information from our elders because they were post-trauma situation and they did not want to speak about what happened, not in 36, not in 48. And back to the situation of Palestinians in 48, our situation is very complex and many people do not understand it. But nevertheless, I think that we are a very important bridge to use the privilege that we have. And I say privilege, to have an Israeli passport is not a privilege. And many times when I travel with it, I'm full with shame. But from the other side, I can say, wow, it is something that I can use it for the benefit of my people.
And you can go back without.
Exactly.
Now, I want to also clarify another misconception because it's very important. Because for a lot of Palestinians, they assume that a lot of the Bedouins work for the Israelis or they serve in the Israeli military, and they do. Some of them they
Some
do.
of them, yeah.
And in fact, you're the second Bedouin who
Interesting.
we have had
On the
right
show.
here on the show.
I'm
And
curious
a
who
couple
was
of
the first.
the first one was from Naqab or Negev area,
Naqab, right.
and she was here on a tour talking about
Amazing,
how
yeah.
they were trying to settle them, force them to settle and appropriating their land, etc. And she's
They are
not.
still, not
They're
was,
still
but
no other
still,
time,
yeah.
and she's an attorney and she's a human rights activist and so
Right.
forth.
That's okay.
And then how her family, and especially her brothers, and because she said, yeah, we have some who are ignorant about our history, so they kind of decided to serve in the Israeli army. But our family refused to serve in the Israeli army, and many of them ended up in jail and in their homes and so forth. So how do you balance between? I mean, how do we educate the public? There are those who because Israel uses this as their Hasbara, the Hasbara propaganda. Look at us. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had an Israeli general counsel right here in San Francisco who was a Bedouin.
Yeah.
And then so they were running around saying, look, we are a democracy.
Yeah.
And then you open the newspaper, any newspaper, including Haaretz and Israeli media, and say, look how the Bedouins are losing their homes. And they're not treated as first-class citizens. They're maybe second, third-class citizens. So how do you balance between these two images?
I think the Israeli Hasbara will use every information to make to color the picture pink about Israel, that it's democracy, because they know that it's not democracy. I mean, if you know that you are fragile, you go and attack because you are fragile, and they know that they are fragile. I mean, and we don't want to waste our time on really explaining that Israel is not a democracy. It's not at all, and they will use everything to do it. I would say that I have no judgment for these Bedouins who go and serve the army, and I say very careful. As a peace activist, I know that from which circumstances they are doing this. And if we take a view into the Bedouin villages and the Palestinian villages also, where people have no work, no education, nothing to do in the afternoons, nothing, then comes the army and say, yeah, they give you a good salary and they give you this and they come and you serve. And and you get a uniform, and you get a gun, a machine gun, so you can kill. You are a man, you have power. And this is where we need to come as a peace movement, of giving the alternative for every sector in our society, to empower that sector, so not to be tempted to go to that direction. And I would also say that not only the Bedouins who serve the army, I don't know how we entered into this topic, but I also want to say to Palestinians inside the West Bank who go and work in the settlements.
Yes.
Oh God, there is no difference between the two, and I'm really careful when I say it, because I also know the levels of poverty that exist in these villages. And then people say, what shall I do? I have to go and earn my money. No, you are building that society that is killing you. You are building the wall that is separating you. Don't do it. But it's not enough to say don't do it. We have to create the alternative. And this is my work. And if you allow me, I want to focus on what we do.
Okay, so no. I mean, it's very important. And this is all part and parcel of the colonial mentality and colonialism. The French did the same thing in Algeria and separated the society and so forth. So what do you do? And what are you doing right here in the Bay Area?
So what we do is that we go to villages in the West Bank and also in 48, and we create spaces for the people to remember the knowledge that they have, and to remember the knowledge that they have in the whole issue of growing food, collecting our water, alternative ways of energy, and making and supporting our society to become a resilient society. What does it mean, a resilient society? A resilient society is a society that the members of it create trust between them. And we know that the most thing that is wounded between people is trust. We lost trust between people. We don't trust the other. We are ignorant to the other. And we create spaces where people reveal themselves from the inner. What are my fears? What are my worries? What do I need? Why I behave the way I behave? And we create spaces where there is no judgment, but full integration of these powers. When I say remembering our knowledge of food, most of the Palestinian energy is going these days of boycotting. Let's boycott Israel and boycott the settlements and boycott the products. And they say, yes, let's boycott them. And I say this also with taking a risk as a holder of an Israeli passport. I also can be punished for saying that, but I say yes, let's boycott it. But before you boycott something, you have to have the alternative. Do we have the alternative? Why do we leave our fields empty, not taking care? Why do we allow that we are not present all the time in our fields, growing our food, eating a food that is without chemicals, not poisoning Mother Earth, which is our mother? We say, بحب فلسطين, بحبك يا فلسطين. Palestine is Mother Earth, a piece of Mother Earth.
We're speaking with Ida Shibli.
We have 5 minutes.
We have a few minutes left. If people want to hear more about your work in the Bay Area, I mean, you're here, so we should hear a little bit about where people can actually see you, speak with you, and interact with you. What is your itinerary here in the Bay Area?
The main reason why I came to the Bay Area is, first of all, I want to make a vision quest to have my hope again. 2018 was such a tough year for us Palestinians, with the whole issue of the Great March of Return, where I lost hope.
Yeah.
Also as a peace activist. And one of my teachers is holding a vision quest, and I came to make it. The second main and most important reason is that in the last 6 months, we took 2 families of refugees to our community in Portugal.
Wow.
And I'm raising funds for them. One of them is a family from Gaza. We have only the woman now, the mother, 25 years, and her 2 children and husband is still in Gaza, and we want to get them out. She's a very major actor where she can mobilize the youth in Gaza, and we want to support her for 2 years of education. And the other family is from Cameroon, and I want to raise funds for them. And I'm having a few events in the Bay Area, where tonight I will speak
tell us about it.
The power of the erotical power in us women. Why when we hold and we know this sacred erotical power, why we can stand in love for all what lives and hold life. So tonight it will be an event in Berkeley
Is that open or a closed event?
for women. It's open for women only.
Open for women only.
And where is that? Where people can go? I mean, or
Where
is
can
it-
women go?
Where women can go. I can give the address.
Or
later.
do you have a website where people can go
Yes.
to check this
Yes.
out? Okay.
Sure. And other events will be in Sebastopol and in other places where it is about speaking about, in details about the work that we do in Palestine and how people can support it. As I said in the beginning, Palestine is the issue of humanity. It's not our issue as Palestinians. And if we succeed to turn something in Palestine, then we turned it in the whole world. And our planet Earth in danger, not the planet itself, us as human species are in danger. Planet Earth will remain after us. And so how do we step into this next level of consciousness of being in the unity, but not only as a slogan, really truly in unity. As Jalaluddin Rumi said, there's no two in unity. And how do we create this one so we can stand for our task in life, stewards of life?
That's the voice of Ida Shibli.
And what is your website, Aida?
www.tamara.org.
Tamara?
Tamara.
TAMARA
Exactly.
.com.
.org.
Oh,
.org. Okay, so go to tamara.org to learn more about Aida Shibli's work
Very
and
impressive.
support her work. We're coming to an end of another Arab Talk
Another
on
Arab Talk, Jamal.
KPO San Francisco
Gracias.
89.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Ida.
Thank you. So we will talk to you next week.
Uh,
Actually, we
Just come here next week.
come next week.
We don't know what you'll hear, but
What
you'll
you'll
hear
hear.
something.
And then you're going to receive actually some reports from Spain.
Yes.
Because I'll be in Spain. We'll talk about Portugal.
Wow.
And then so I'll be reporting from
Live.
from Barcelona and from Andalusia and so
Live
forth.
from Granada. So stay tuned on Arab Talk.
In
We'll
Alhambra.
Yes.
in Alhambra. We'll see you next week.
See you
See
next
you.
week.